I've sat by more hospital beds than I can count. Not just in the sterile white of the medical kind, but in sunlit living rooms, spare bedrooms turned into quiet sanctuaries, and even on porches where old souls waited for something they couldn't quite name. In all those rooms, through all those years, I've seen one thing again and again: good families, loving children, making small mistakes that slowly turned into heavy regrets. Not out of neglect, never out of cruelty, just out of fear, out of not knowing, out of love that didn't know where to go. When my friend, a hospice nurse named Margaret, first told me, "It's not the dying that hurts the most. It's the things we didn't say while they were still here," I didn't really understand. Not then. But now, after nearly 20 years working with end-of-life care, grief counseling, and elder support, I do. And that's what I want to share with you today. Not a list, not a lecture, just 6 moments I've watched happen too many times, and how you might move through them with a little more grace, if the time ever comes. Let me start with the first one. It's perhaps the most common, and the most invisible. We wait too long to talk. We tell ourselves there will be a better moment. After the next appointment, after they feel stronger, after the weekend, after the fear calms down. But the thing is, aging, especially in its final chapter, doesn't follow our schedule. I remember a man named Paul. His father, Mr. Langley, was 84 when he entered hospice. A strong man, the kind who never asked for help, who built furniture by hand well into his 70s. Paul told me, "I didn't want to upset him. I thought if I brought up anything too heavy, he'd feel like I was giving up on him. So they kept it light. They watched baseball, talked about the garden, avoided anything that hinted at goodbye." Mr. Langley passed one morning at 4:10 a.m. Peacefully. No drama, no pain. But after that, Paul couldn't stop crying. Not because his father was gone, but because they never spoke about what mattered. "I never asked him how he wanted to be remembered," Paul said. "I never told him it was okay to go." There's this strange idea we have, that talking about death makes it come faster. But in truth, it's the opposite. Talking about it gives it less power. It opens space for calm, for clarity. And most importantly, it makes room for love to speak before it's too late. Even just saying, "Dad, if there's ever a moment you feel ready to talk, I'm here, and I won't be afraid," can be more comforting than you imagine. Sometimes they'll say, "Not now," and that's okay. But the fact that you offered, that stays with them. The second mistake I've seen is when families try to fix things that don't need fixing. Margaret told me this story. She was caring for a woman named Edith, 91 years old, brittle and bright-eyed. Her daughter, Dana, kept bringing vitamins, new diets, aromatherapy, herbal tinctures she read about online. "She means well," Edith whispered one day, "but I don't want more fight. I want more peace." We confuse helping with healing sometimes. We think if we try just one more thing, they'll bounce back. That letting them rest means we've given up. But the truth is, there comes a time when the body isn't trying to recover anymore. It's trying to prepare. And when we keep pushing it to do more, to eat more, to move more, to try one more medication, we can unintentionally add stress to a process that actually needs gentleness. That doesn't mean neglect. It doesn't mean letting go completely, but it does mean listening. Asking questions like, "What feels good today? Would you rather rest or sit outside for a while?" Shifting from treatment to comfort is one of the bravest, kindest things a family can do. Because comfort is not giving up. It's loving someone as they are, not as we wish they still could be. When you change the goal from prolonging life to honoring it, everything softens. The house becomes quieter, conversations become slower, and your presence becomes more important than any plan. If I could tell every son, every daughter, every spouse one thing, it would be this: you don't have to save them, you just have to sit with them so they don't feel alone. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, comes from fear. And it brings us to the third mistake I see far too often. Families stop speaking honestly, not just to their parent but to each other. Start small. One sibling says, "Let's not tell Dad what the doctor said until he's stronger." Another says, Don't upset mom with too many questions. And soon, everyone's walking on eggshells. Avoiding, deflecting, pretending. I once worked with a family, 3 adult children, caring for their mother, June. She was quiet, elegant. One of those women who wore perfume and lipstick even in her final months. The daughters meant well. They cleaned the house, organized her pills, took turns staying overnight. But they disagreed on almost everything: how much she should eat, whether she needed another scan, who should speak to the hospice team. And no one told June the full truth about her condition. She doesn't need to worry, they said. But here's the thing, she already knew. When we avoid hard conversations, we don't protect our loved ones. We isolate them. We make them carry their fears alone. One day, June looked at me and said, "Why do they whisper when they think I'm sleeping? I'm not stupid. I know what's happening." There was no anger in her voice, just loneliness. Margaret, the hospice nurse, once told me, "Dying people don't need us to shield them from the truth. They need us to walk with them through it." And that starts with honest, gentle conversations. Not forced, not clinical, just open. Even saying, "Would you like to know what the doctors told us?" Or, "I don't want to overwhelm you, but I'm here if you want to talk about anything at all," can break through the fear without breaking the moment. Because once we're honest, we can begin to grieve together. Not in secret, not in shame, but with clarity and care. The fourth mistake is one that surprised me when I first started in this field. It's not something we talk about much, but it happens more than you'd expect. We confuse presence with productivity. Let me explain. I've seen family members spend 12 hours at their parents' bedside, fixing the blanket, checking their temperature, rearranging flowers, offering drinks every 20 minutes. They're always doing, always managing, always busy, and inside, they're exhausted and quietly unraveling. Being present doesn't always mean being active. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen in stillness. There was a son named Andrew, a quiet man, mid-50s, who came to visit his mother every evening after work. He'd bring books, snacks, crossword puzzles. He'd stay for an hour or two, then leave, always polite. One day I asked him if he ever just sat with her in silence. He paused. "Not really. I don't want it to feel awkward." But when his mother passed, Andrew told me something I've never forgotten. "I spent so much time trying to make her feel cared for. I never gave her the space to just be with me." We live in a world that celebrates action, doing, solving, moving. But the final months of life don't ask for movement. They ask for presence. A hand held quietly, a chair pulled close without any need for conversation. Just breath beside breath, a heartbeat next to another. And when you let yourself stop doing, you often discover the most intimate form of love, just being. I once watched a granddaughter, 17 years old, sit beside her grandfather in a nursing home. She said nothing for over an hour, just sat with her hand resting on his forearm. When he passed a week later, she told me, "I think he knew I was there, and that was enough." In the rush to take care, don't forget to take time, to be quiet, to be steady, to let love be enough, even without words. Because sometimes the body is too tired to keep talking, but the soul still listens. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. Your words remind me that we're not alone in this. One afternoon, I sat with a man named Harold. He was 82, bones thin like reeds, but his voice still carried weight. The kind of voice that once filled dinner tables and boardrooms. His daughter, Melanie, was his primary caregiver, and she was devoted, but quietly falling apart. Harold could sense it. He looked at me and said, "She's doing everything right, but she won't let herself sit down." And that brings me to the fifth mistake. We don't give ourselves permission to grieve while they're still alive. There's a strange rule we carry, that grief must wait until death, that we must hold it together, be strong, stay functional. But anticipatory grief, the sorrow that builds while a loved one is still here, is very real, and it's heavy. Melanie cried in the laundry room, in the car, in whispered phone calls to her husband late at night, but never in front of Harold. "I don't want him to feel like he's a burden," she told me. What she didn't know is that Harold already knew. He saw it in her eyes, in her movements, in the way she smiled too quickly. And one day, when she finally broke, just sat beside him and cried without apology, he reached for her hand and said, "I was waiting for you to let go." Grief doesn't wait for death to arrive. It comes in waves. When the voice you love begins to weaken, when familiar jokes no longer land, when the future becomes a shrinking circle. And if we try to carry that quietly, it isolates both the one leaving and the one staying. Hospice nurse Margaret used to say, "Letting your loved ones see your sadness doesn't break them. It shows them how deeply they matter. You don't have to cry every day. You don't have to fall apart. But it's okay, more than okay, to sit beside your parent, to say, 'This is hard. I don't want to lose you, but I'm here.' That kind of honesty isn't weakness. It's love in its most human form. And when you allow yourself to grieve in small, honest pieces, the final goodbye doesn't shatter you in the same way, because you didn't save it all for the end. There's one last mistake I'll speak to today. It's the one that's hardest to recognize when you're in it. We try to make the goodbye perfect. I've watched so many families chase a good ending. They want the right playlist, the favorite food, the entire family gathered, everyone holding hands in a quiet, candlelit room. But death, like birth, doesn't always follow the script. Sometimes it comes in the middle of the night when the room is empty. Sometimes your loved one passes while you're down the hall getting a glass of water. Sometimes they go without warning, and without the moment you'd planned for. And I've seen sons and daughters carry guilt for years because they weren't in the room. I stepped out for 10 minutes. I didn't get to say goodbye. I should have known it was the last day. But here's what I've learned. After all these years, the goodbye isn't in the final moment. It's in every night you sat by the bed, every spoonful of soup, every shared silence, every time you whispered, "I love you," even if they didn't answer. Margaret once told me, the dying choose their moment, and often they wait until we're not there, because they don't want us to see them go. It's not abandonment. It's a kind of final gift to leave quietly without causing a scene. So if your parent passes when you're not in the room, don't carry that as failure. Carry it as grace. You were there. Maybe not in the final 5 minutes, but in all the hours, all the days, all the ways that mattered most. Let go of the idea that the end has to be beautiful to be meaningful. What matters is the love you gave while they were still here. And sometimes, love looks like imperfection, like awkward conversations, like quiet grief in the hallway. But it's real, and it's enough. The house always sounds different after they're gone. Even if nothing changes, the same furniture, the same kitchen clock ticking too loud, the silence wraps itself around everything. Not empty, just altered, like the air is remembering someone. And that's where we step into the part no one really prepares us for. What happens after? Not the logistics, the paperwork, the arrangements, the phone calls, but the emotional space, the pause, the stretch of quiet where you expect to hear their voice calling from the other room, and all you get is stillness. I want to talk about one more mistake here, though it belongs more to the aftermath than to the final year. But it connects deeply. We rush the return to normal. I understand it. There's laundry to do, bills to pay, work to return to, other family members who need support. But I've seen this again and again. People trying to be okay too soon, because they think that's what strength looks like. One man, his name was Richard, lost his mother at 86. He was her caregiver for 3 years, and in the final one, barely left her side. The day after she passed, he went back to mowing the lawn, paid bills, cleaned the fridge, took out the trash. When I checked on him, he smiled politely and said, "I'm keeping busy." That's what she'd want. But 2 weeks later, he collapsed in the grocery store. Not physically, emotionally. He stood frozen in the canned soup aisle, unable to move, because everything in him had finally caught up. The grief we delay will wait for us. It doesn't vanish. It just softens its voice until we're quiet enough to hear it again. Margaret once said, "You don't need to bounce back. You need to land. And landing takes time, takes long walks, uneven sleep, empty chairs that keep catching your eye. Takes breathing through the moments when you want to call them, and remembering there's no one on the other end anymore. That's not something to fix. It's something to honor. So if you're in that place where the grief is quiet but constant, give yourself space. Say no to gatherings that feel too loud. Let the dishes wait. Take the long way home if it helps. Because normal after a loss isn't the same shape it used to be. And the people who loved you, the ones still here, will understand, even if you have no words for it. There's something else I've noticed. In families that move through a parent's final year with openness, even amid mistakes, there's a kind of tenderness that stays behind. It shows up later in strange ways. A son starts making his father's chili recipe every winter. Not because it tastes the same, but because the act of stirring that pot keeps him close. A daughter starts wearing her mother's scarf to church, even in summer. A grandson walks through the garden and catches himself saying, "Grandpa would have hated how these tomatoes are spaced." These aren't just habits. They're grief in motion, memory becoming part of the everyday. And they matter more than we think. Because when we love someone deeply, we don't just lose them once. We lose them again and again, in the little moments we didn't expect to hurt so much. But those little moments also give us something back. They remind us that our love didn't end. It just changed shape. I once asked an elderly woman. She was 91, vibrant and sharp. What helped her most after losing her husband of 63 years? She didn't hesitate. "I kept talking to him," she said, "out loud sometimes. I'd sit in the chair he liked and just tell him what I made for lunch. I asked if it felt silly. She laughed gently. Silly to who? That stayed with me. Because grief isn't about moving on. It's about learning how to carry someone in a new way. So talk to them. Leave the chair by the window just as they liked it. Play their favorite song on Sunday mornings. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Love has always been quieter than the world understands. I used to think closure meant a final moment. Conversation. A last breath. A clean goodbye that wrapped everything up like the final page of a novel. But after all these years, sitting beside so many beds, watching families cry and laugh and fall silent, I've come to understand something else entirely. Closure doesn't arrive on time. It doesn't happen at the funeral. It rarely shows up when you expect it. Sometimes it sneaks in during a quiet afternoon when you realize you haven't cried that day. Sometimes it comes while folding the last shirt from their drawer. Sometimes it never really comes. And that's okay, because love doesn't always want to close. It just wants a place to rest. That's what this journey is in the end, not a checklist of what we did right or wrong, but a slow, human, imperfect attempt at showing up with love. And if you've done that, even just a little, then you've done more than enough. Let me gently remind you now of what we've walked through together. We make the mistake of waiting too long to talk, because we don't want to make things worse, not realizing that silence often hurts more than honesty ever could. We try to fix when fixing is no longer what's needed, when the body is seeking rest, not recovery, and comfort becomes the kindest medicine of all. We protect our loved ones from truths they already sense, forgetting that most people near the end aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of dying alone in their thoughts. We stay busy to prove we care, but sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop doing and simply sit in the quiet. We hold back our tears to be strong, but strength also looks like weeping openly, letting our parents see how deeply they mattered. And finally, we chase the perfect goodbye, without knowing that goodbyes are never perfect, and often happen quietly in ordinary moments long before the final one. These aren't failures, they're human patterns, and they come from love. So if you're looking back and thinking, "I should have known, I could have done more," please take this from someone who's seen the inside of grief too many times to count. Your presence mattered. Even when you stumbled, even when you didn't know what to say, the meals you brought, the late-night phone calls, the way you kept showing up, even when it hurt, all of that was love in motion. And if your parent didn't get to say it, let me say it for them. Thank you. You did your best. Now that we've reached the end of this conversation, or perhaps just the beginning of your own, Let me offer something small. Keep them close. Not with guilt. Not with regret. But with intention. Tell someone their story. Wear something they left behind. Speak their name when no one else does anymore. Because love outlives the body. It lingers in memory, in routine, in the way you carry what they gave you. And when the ache comes back, as it will, let it be a signal that love is still working inside you. Still reaching. Still listening. Still present. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here. This space was made for moments like this. No pressure. No noise. Just steady words when you need them. Until then, be gentle with yourself. You're walking through something sacred,